Hello, friends. Welcome to the Eddie Liger Power Hour, the most popular show on the internet. Don't look that up. Today, we're going to be talking about what we think happened with the Oliver Anthony interview so far. And I'll just give you an update on where we're at with that, just so people are aware, because our name was mentioned in some mainstream media news articles about him recently, so that was interesting. We're going to be talking about the so-called incoming collapse of China that's all over the Western media right now, and an ABC News report claiming that China's about to collapse. And then we'll be talking about the back and forth that went on between Bernie Sanders and Cornell West, with them responding to each other in the media. So yeah, great show today. We'll get right into it after the intro. All righty. Popers. Oh, sorry, wrong one. Popers already says, it's funny that you're doing a video on this. I just saw some shitlib grifter talking about panic buying salt in China. Yeah, it's going around the Western media again. It's ridiculous. We just published an article from John Ross, actually, called "The News is Full of Headlines About China's Economic Collapse. Ignore them." And John Ross is an economist and somebody who's done a lot of work on the DPRK, or North Korea, China, and economies in Asia. So we're actually going to use an ABC News report from one of those shitlibs saying that China's economy is going to collapse, using very similar metrics to that Peter Zeihan guy who we responded to in the past. That's just neo-Malthusian population economics, saying, based on population trends that we've extrapolated from certain data, we're going to predict that China's economy is about to collapse. And it's quite silly. I did a good amount of research to get ready for this, because the video is quite long and it's filled with propaganda. So it should be good to break down that. Good morning, comrades. Thanks for your streams, Eddie. Thanks for watching the streams. No need to thank me. I love doing this. Hello, Eddie. Greetings from Cyprus. Very cool. Greetings from the Midwest. The Midwest Cyprus connection. Good afternoon. Yeah, how's it going, everybody? So update with the Oliver Anthony thing. We're not sure what happened so far. We wish that we wouldn't have brought up that his supposed manager told us that he was trapped at Burning Man, because that's what we were told, right? And we were corresponding with this person back and forth. We had no reason to believe that these were like pranksters or that it was fake or something. And, that would be kind of an elaborate story to just make up, that he's trapped at Burning Man. But that's what we were told, so that's what we reported to you guys. But then, some mainstream media outlets, we just didn't realize how many eyeballs would be on the stream. Some mainstream media outlets took that and ran with it, and they were sourcing us like, Oliver Anthony is stuck at Burning Man. And, to be fair, the only correspondence that we've had with him and his the person saying that he's his manager is through email, right? So there's a chance. There's definitely a chance that this was like some elaborate prank, and some people who don't like the Institute and didn't like Oliver Anthony's song emailed us because they knew we were reaching out for an interview somehow and said, that they would have had to create an email that was sounded like it was Oliver Anthony's and emailed us, which, I mean, I guess we should have been like ready for that to happen, or before we announced the interview, we should have been like, maybe this is a prank. I don't know. Maybe we should ask them to send a picture of them holding a spoon so we know it's actually Oliver Anthony or something, because they were sending very legitimate emails back and forth, or what you would expect somebody to send back and forth when setting up an email. So, we had no reason to believe it was fake or anything. And then we had no reason to believe they were lying about him being at Burning Man. But we probably should have kept that under wraps because some mainstream media outlets took it and reported on it, like I said. And, we didn't necessarily want that to happen, but it is what it is. And then what else was I going to say? We didn't know it was fake. Oh, yeah. And then I just have a hard time believe like anybody would take the time, like any angry radlib leftist would take the time to impersonate somebody else to try and set up a fake interview. Because I don't know, we had people in our stream when we thought we were going to be doing the interview a couple days ago saying like, I have tons of people over at my house right now to watch this. Or one guy said that, I'm really disappointed because I didn't go to evening church service so I could be here. It's like, what kind of leftist would lie or create a prank to try and set up a fake interview that just screws over working class people and disappoints working class people and gets working class people to inconvenience themselves? Like, why is that what you're spending your time doing as someone who calls yourself a leftist? Is that the best use of your time? I don't know. We don't know that it's, that it was some kind of elaborate prank yet. But that is a possibility. So we'll keep you guys tuned. It's unfortunate. I just get angry about it when I think about it. Like, why would anybody do that? What is the point? What kind of wrecker behavior is this? But, I wouldn't put it past the American left. I wouldn't put it past the Twitter radlibs to create a fake email, impersonate Oliver Anthony, and try and get us to set up an interview that doesn't happen. But either way, we'll keep you guys posted. Either way, we're going to keep talking about Marxism. We're going to keep talking about theory, doing geopolitical and political analysis and economic analysis, and keep doing what we do. So hopefully the interview happens. Hopefully it wasn't some prank. And yeah. Thoughts on election denialism in 2020? Oh, people saying the election was rigged. I mean, I haven't really looked into it, but as far as I know, there's no evidence that the election was any more rigged than any other U.S. election, But that's the thing that makes me so mad, is that the liberals are like, how evil is Trump, claiming that the election was rigged, claiming that we don't have a democracy in the United States. My stars. How could Trump say that the United States isn't a democracy when in this country, Citizens United, which was passed in 2011, I believe, basically legalized political bribery, said that corporations are allowed to spend as much on politics as they want, and 93% of the elections in this country are decided by the candidate who raises the most money. Right? It's a fundraising competition to see who can get the most big money donors, and then lobbyists and lobbying groups are the ones writing our bills, are the ones pushing for what gets passed through the House or in Washington. Right? So we don't have a democracy anyways. The people aren't in power in our country. Money is in power. It's a dictatorship of the capitalist class. It's a dictatorship of the dollar. And who has all the dollars? It's the capitalists. It's the people who are accumulating more and more wealth from our labor every day. Right? So this idea that Trump is the biggest threat to democracy in the United States, it's ridiculous. Like, capitalism is the biggest threat to democracy, right? Not Trump. Trump is just a symptom of our capitalist conditions. So, yeah, that's my opinion on it. I mean, I don't believe that the election was like rigged through like a bunch of donkeys and stuff. But I will say too, when I was working for the Bernie Sanders campaign, I mean, I don't know how much I want to get into this story because I've told it a million times, but it looked like Bernie was going to win Iowa. And the main thing with winning Iowa is it's the first state. So the media goes, oh my gosh, this person won. You get a huge media boost going into the next few states. So it looked like Bernie was going to win. All our internal polling with the Bernie campaign told us we were going to win. But as the votes were being counted, the system crashed. The vote counting system crashed. And then come to find out, the company who created the voting app was a donor, a huge donor to the Pete Buttigieg campaign. And they were called Shadow, and they had worked directly with the Buttigieg campaign. And then once the voting app crashes, Pete Buttigieg declares himself the winner, which it turned out was not true. Bernie won the popular vote in Iowa. The only metric that Pete Buttigieg won was called state delegates, which is irrelevant. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a way to count who I don't even know why there's a state delegate count because it doesn't mean anything. So Bernie technically won, but Buttigieg declared victory after the app crashed. So he got the media boost. And of course, the media was against Bernie because he wanted to give people health care. So they just gave this giant media boost to Pete Buttigieg. And yeah, he basically got to act like he won Iowa when he didn't. Because the voting app that was connected to his campaign shut down. Right. So I'm not saying that election was rigged. Right. But would I, get if I told that story and suggested that it could have been rigged or that there could have been some funny business going on? Am I threatening American democracy? Right. And we don't have an American democracy. Like I said, everybody recognizes that our politicians are corrupted. They're bought and paid for. And and we know that our country directly interferes in elections and democratic processes abroad all around the world. So it's not the craziest thing to think that they wouldn't, mess with things domestically too. But, I haven't seen evidence for it. The Mules movie by Dinesh D'Souza seemed really stupid, and I don't trust Dinesh D'Souza. He's not an honest actor at all. But yeah, that's my view on it. The fact that someone would go to the effort to do that is kind of sad. It is sad. I hope people find Jesus. It would have been odd because they couldn't possibly have timed the evacuation with the interview, right? And also, like, we had reached out to Oliver Anthony to do an interview, and that's when we heard back from him and his manager. So it's like, how would anyone have known that and been able to pull off that prank? I don't know, but hilarious prank if it is a prank. Are they still in contact? Yeah, they've hit us back a couple times. But keep your head up, Eddie. I like the attitude. Definitely. I'm stoic when it comes to stuff like this. I think this is kind of one of the events that shaped me into who I am today. And I don't talk about it a lot because there's a lot of like trauma involved with it. But when I was younger, I had like a long-term illness. I got bit by a deer tick when I was camping with my family, and all of a sudden I got this bullseye-shaped rash on my upper leg. And those who go camping a lot or are outdoorsmen or are involved in medicine probably know that bullseye-shaped rash is a sign of Lyme disease, right? And Lyme disease is a very interesting disease. There are symptoms that almost everybody gets when they get Lyme disease, like your joints get achy, you get Bell's palsy, and your face starts to droop, you get tingly, but also it like weakens your immune system and it weakens your gut and your microbiome, and that causes all these other problems that people with Lyme disease then suffer. Now and I've written about this, and I should probably publish it to Midwestern Marks because I did a full literature review for my healthcare administration program, looking at Lyme disease versus chronic Lyme disease. Because there's a huge percentage of people who get treated for Lyme disease, it goes away for a while, and then the symptoms come back, right? And there's a major tendency within the mainstream, within mainstream medicine and with mainstream medical doctors and mainstream researchers to say that these people are faking it, to say that their symptoms are subjective and they're faking it because they can't treat it with antibiotics. But there are a lot of theories as to what happens. Like, for one, when you get Lyme disease, they nuke it with antibiotics, which can then weaken your gut microbiome and lead to all these other long-term health problems. Long story short, I got Lyme disease, and for the next handful of years dealt with all of these long-term health issues like stomach pain at first. But then it when I was in middle school, it turned into like vomiting, like literally 20 to as high as 50 times a day was as high as it got. Like I literally couldn't keep food down. I would just throw it up. So obviously that made it so I couldn't wrestle. That made it so I couldn't do the things that I love. It just put a huge roadblock in my life towards doing everything I wanted. And this is where I started to become really, really critical of the capitalist healthcare system, which you guys all know is an issue that I'm really passionate about. We've talked a lot about capitalist healthcare, big pharma, the profit motive in healthcare. I have a whole playlist on TikTok called Capitalist Healthcare. And this is the reason I'm so, and I was getting a master's degree in healthcare administration. The reason I'm so passionate about that is because of my bad experience with the for-profit healthcare system growing up. So, long story short, when bad and unfortunate things happen that are out of my control, it usually doesn't throw me off that bad. I'm usually able to take it and spin it into something positive. One of my favorite sayings that my dad instilled in my head when I was young is called turn disadvantage into advantage. You know, when life throws you a disadvantageous situation, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. You turn it into an advantage. You just keep doing what you're doing, maybe adjust a little bit. And yeah, things will look up eventually if you keep doing the right thing. So that's how I feel about that. Dealt with much worse things in my life than perhaps some pranksters making a fake interview. So. Blue wave type. We need a red wave. Definitely. No one did more for the rat population than Mayo Pete in Iowa. Oh, there was this hilarious meme of Pete where it was like his name, and then it was like one of those, there was like a word for every letter of his name. What's that called? I can't remember what that's called. But it was like, pay your way to political success, enter the election to hurt the only pro-working class candidate, turn off all your principles, and then the last E for Pete was engage rat mode. Remember the high hopes? Oh my, we got to look this up. This was the worst. This was the worst thing ever. Everyone who was involved in the 2020 campaign, at least for Bernie, knows what I'm talking about when I say high hopes for Mayor Pete. At least the Iowa organizers know about this. I don't know about other organizers nationally, but they need to know about this if they don't. This is what they would do. They would show up at campaign events, and like the Bernie people would do something like we once organized a march against corporate greed, where we were marching against the DNC and the corporations who control the DNC. And then the Pete Buttigieg campaign would just be over here doing this. And when we were doing the march against the corporate greed thing, there was a guy with a Beto O'Rourke shirt. Beto had just dropped out of the race. And he was like walking around like this, like pouting and picking up all the Beto signs so he could throw them away. I'm like, oh, that's sad. And I hate to see you waiting. This is what Pete offered the American people. Pete's the worst because he came into the race saying, yeah, I support Medicare for all. It makes perfect sense. Medicare for all would save us money. Like, why wouldn't we go for that? And then he started getting money from the insurance industry. He's like, never mind. Never mind. I support the Affordable Care Act now. No, he like didn't even didn't even try to pretend like he had principles for a little bit. It was like the insurance money came in. He's like, no more healthcare. Only high hopes. One more. Just one more. Everybody do it with me now. Push, roll, peak, mayo. Oh man, and like the Pete supporters were the worst people to talk to as well when you were door knocking or canvassing. Oh my gosh, you'd be like, well, Bernie, he marched with Martin Luther King during the civil rights movement. He's always stood up for oppressed people and working people. He's pro-union. He's got this policy, Medicare for all, that's going to make healthcare much, much cheaper for all Americans and make it universally available. Then they'd be like, yeah, I'm just kind of feeling Pete this year, though. Like these upper middle class white people. It's just kind of a Pete year for me. I'm like, well, what the hell does that? What does that mean? It's just kind of a Pete year for you. He's corrupt. And then they'd get mad. They're like, well, how could you say that about Pete? He seems so nice. He's got high hopes. Oh, man. People like that. Your imitation. Dude, I literally, we all learned the dance. Like me and my friends all learned the dance. And after the Iowa primary ended, we went to like a bar to hang out with all the Bernie people. And Carlos and I were hitting the dance. And then and then Carlos and I got on the Bernie people's aux and we played Red Army Choir. We started playing all these songs from the Soviet Union, and the Democratic staffers on the Bernie campaign were like, oh, stop it. Wasn't there a guy whose whole thing was UBI, and once he got a job at MSNBC, he wasn't for it anymore? Sounds about right. I mean, like, Pete switched so fast. He switched so fast. I wonder if, I don't know, it doesn't even matter, but there's an interview of him saying he's in favor of Medicare for all. There really is. Oh, yeah, and then he changed his policy to Medicare for all who want it. So he stole the name because he knew that Medicare for all was popular because it's a good policy, and people like us at the Bernie campaign worked our butts off to spread Medicare for all and popularize it throughout the U.S. I mean, even Bernie himself, you got to give him credit for doing that. Even though I have my criticisms of him, and I'm going to bash him later on the show today. He did popularize Medicare for all, so Pete wanted to capitalize on that popularity. He wanted to have the name, so he called it Medicare for all who want it. Like, for all who want it, who doesn't want healthcare, Peter? Who doesn't want to be covered? Universal healthcare for everybody except those who hate healthcare and who just want to die if they contract cancer or something. Every day I hear this China will break thing. Yeah, we're going to break it down today. Let's actually jump into that. The news headlines in the Western mainstream media are once again filled with the claim that China is going to collapse. Now, the last time we talked about this, we broke down Joe Rogan's conversation with Peter Zeihan, somebody who's been saying that China is going to collapse for at least 10 years now. He was even claiming China was going to collapse in the early 2000s. But of course, China didn't collapse. There was a book written in 2001 called The Inevitable Collapse of China or something, The Oncoming Collapse of China. Western academics have been doing wishful thinking in the form of scholarship, for a long time. Or maybe not Western academics, but the Western mainstream media has been saying that China's going to collapse soon. Soon, it's inevitable. It's coming. Trust us. China doesn't know what they're doing. Their socialist economy is soon to dissolve. It's going to collapse in on itself. It's going to go away just like the Soviet Union did, and Western multinationals will once again be able to pillage China for all they're worth. This is what the Western media keeps saying, but again, it's just them putting their wishful thinking out into the world and calling it news. So today we've got an article from the great economist and journalist John Ross, or I don't know if he considers himself a journalist, but great economist who does really good reports about the DPRK, about China and other countries in Asia and Southern Asia, who published an article for Midwestern Marx titled "The News is Full of Headlines About China's Economic Collapse. Ignore Them" by John Ross. So I recommend everybody read this if you get a chance. I'll copy and paste it in the chat right now. It's great to read the whole thing. It's very quick, just filled with economic data and, refuting a few of the claims from the Western media. But somebody also sent me this in the Discord the other day. This is from ABC News, I believe. China miscounted its population. Now the economy is in crisis. Another article or news story from the mainstream Western media. I believe this guy's based in Australia, claiming that China is going to collapse. So I figured we go through this, analyze his claims, look at them critically, and compare them to the data that John Ross brings up in his article, claiming that China's not going to collapse. So I believe this is like an Australian hipster Kyle Kulinski here. So let's see what Kyle has to say about China.
At 3:25 p.m. on August 27th, 2021, thousands of people in the Chinese city of Kunming were standing on their balconies or in streets and parks holding their cameras. Everyone was extremely excited. As 3:30 got closer, the tension built. How loud would it be? Would they all fall?
Sorry, Chesney6490, isn't China state capitalist? Ignore my dumbass if you've covered it. No worries. I mean, this is a question that everybody in the Western world has about China. Every socialist has about China. When we begin to talk about them, I would direct you to our video, Is China Marxist? Which is a video where I respond to Vijay Prashad, an Indian academic, talking about China, why China is socialist. I mean, I don't think state capitalist is a bad definition, but, in the tradition of Marxism, Leninism, Lenin wrote that in the transitionary stage between capitalism and socialism, you're basically going to have state capitalism. You have capitalism, the government is going to lay out these central plans and take control of certain industries within capitalism to help it transition to socialism. That's the quickest explanation I can give you now. I recommend you check out that video, Is China Marxist? By Midwestern Marx on YouTube, or read Roland Bohr's Has China Restored Capitalism? Or Has Capitalism Been Restored in China? Roland Bohr, it's spelled Rolandboer, I believe. We're actually having him on the show for an interview soon, although first we're going to talk to him about theology, and then we will talk to him about China later on. So I wanted to stop and cover this question because it's, very obvious question that's on the minds of any Western leftist who's not super familiar with China or who hasn't studied China deeply. So not a dumb question at all. And one that I wanted to cover before we jump into this video, because this video will be focused on the nitty gritty more so than a broad narrative about is China socialist or capitalist.
Am I far enough away? They were all looking at a neighbourhood of 15 high-rise buildings, 30 stories high.
15 towers, unfinished for 7
This next part is sick, I can't lie.
years. The developer bankrupt.
On radios across the area, a countdown started. 4.8 tons of explosives detonated. Like candlesticks that had just had a tablecloth pulled out from underneath them, they toppled over sideways, into, onto, and around each other.
Isn't that crazy?
It's not something you see every day. And yet,
It's not an isolated case. Across China, the building boom that powered the economic miracle is running out of steam.
across China,
You hear that? China's economy is running out of steam. Look, they're getting rid of houses that nobody's living in to make room for other forms of economic development. Surely this means that their economy is running out of steam. Either way, regardless of whether you agree with that running out of steam line or not, which I do not, this was awesome to watch. It's crazy to watch the buildings fall in on themselves like that. That's how Bush did 9/11. Just kidding. Allegedly. Don't take me off YouTube. I'm not a conspiracist. Leave me alone.
More than 20% of apartments are vacant. The apartments are either unwanted or have been bought by middle-class Chinese investors as a safe place to put their money. But their money is not safe. Property prices are going down. Property developers are going down.
Property prices are going down? No! The Chinese people will actually be able to afford houses, unlike Americans. But who will think of the speculators? Who will think of the housing developers? Houses are for living in, not for speculation. Xi Jinping.
Bankrupt by the...
Housing prices going down in China is a good thing for people who need me to spell it out for them, because that means houses are cheaper. Whereas in the U.S., housing prices are skyrocketing and almost everybody has to rent nowadays.
Massive debt they accrued to build these apartments. The population is going down. The birth rate's going down, meaning there's no one to live in these apartments, which is why... Now, China's situation...
Does that not make sense to demolish them? I mean, if nobody's living in them, doesn't it make sense to demolish them so you can make room for other stuff? In the U.S., we have more empty houses than we have, or we have more homeless people than we... we have more empty houses than we have homeless people. Right, so we've got all these vacant houses and all these people living on the streets, but we won't allow people to live in those because housing prices and the cost of rent are too high. Because in the U.S., we prioritize housing developers and housing speculators and landlords. In China, they prioritize people and their ability to have shelter, to have a home. You know, so if there's unused houses, they're going to get rid of them and put something else there. In the U.S., we don't worry about that. We don't worry if, people are housed. We don't worry if people are living on the streets. We just worry about the bottom line of real estate developers and landlords.
Isn't unique. Similar things have happened in their neighbouring countries due to lots of different factors. But in China, it's happening really fast. The question is, what makes China different? Well, in a way, it's for the same reason most Chinese people my age have no brothers or sisters. China's one-child policy is over. And now it's starting to cost China a lot. I'm Matt Bevan, and this is If You're Listening.
It's so dramatic, yet it's so well produced, and it kind of makes me jealous. I have some lights. That guy's got a lot of lights behind him. I have to set up my strip lights and try and increase our production value around here. I'm never going to be able to be that dramatic when I talk, though. And I'm never going to be able to talk out of my ass this much. China's economy crashing. Let's see it. Let's see it, hipster Kyle Kalinske.
1979, an unusual group of people was sitting around a table in Beijing. A Zimbabwean activist, two famous novelists, the deputy director of the British Museum, the paramount leader of China, Deng Xiaoping,
Round of applause for the architect of modern China, Deng Xiaoping.
And David Attenborough.
Truly astonishing.
The nature documentary guy.
A remarkable piece of deception.
As in, that David Attenborough.
Whoops.
That same year, Attenborough had launched his landmark show Life on Earth, basically the kind of doco he's now known for making. It took 3 years to make and sent him all over the world. But one country he struggled to visit was China. Not many foreigners were allowed in it.
Krana Ursa says, wasn't the one-child policy brought to China by the West? I've heard that, and I mean, there's a lot. I was reading some articles about it today. I mean, it's more complicated than that to say the U.S. just forced the one-child policy on China, but China did go through this reform and opening up period, and that also meant not just opening up to markets, but they were opening up to a lot of ideas. Like they allowed Milton Friedman to come in and talk in China. And they were like, wow, that guy's extremely dogmatic. And they ended up telling him maybe China's economic model will work better than the U.S. economic model, which is hilarious because that's proven to be true. But they were opening up to a lot of different ideas. And obviously Malthusian or neo-Malthusian economics in the U.S. are very, very big. trying to look at economic trends versus population and the growth rate of the population and draw a correlation between the two. Marx obviously went into great detail in Capital Volume 1, criticizing Malthus and showing his analysis of the famine in India failed to take into account capitalism and the inefficiencies and contradictions of capitalism, which actually created the famine. And instead, he just blamed it on the large population size of India, while never actually drawing a statistical correlation between the two. It's just easy to say, right? It sounds right. Oh, the population's growing. We're going to run out of food to feed those people, and that's why they're going to die. It's not because the British are hoarding food and bringing it to feed themselves and depriving the Indian people who they're exploiting as a colony. So neo-Malthusian economics are big in the U.S. And, we see it with China. They're constantly looking at China's changing demographics and saying, look, their economy is going to collapse. Meanwhile, they never show any economic data or economic trends to back up their argument that China's economy is inevitably going to collapse. All they use is population data. This is neo-Malthusianism. Drawing a correlation between population, economics, and then ignoring all the other factors, or most of the other factors. So in the 70s and 80s, based on the limited research I was able to do for this, it seemed like a lot of neo-Malthusian Western academics were pushing their ideas on China, saying your population is too big, your productive forces aren't advanced enough, you need to put a halt on population, you need to do something about population. Even David Attenborough is going to ask Deng Xiaoping, what are you going to do about the population? So it was largely a neo-Malthusian idea in the West that they were pushing, which maybe some of the Chinese academics and leaders accepted a little bit, that China needed to slow down their population and allow their productive forces to catch up. Now, is that the case, or is it just the case that China's economic planners and their leadership said, well, our productive forces aren't that advanced. We're a semi-feudal country. We're not industrialized, and we have this giant population and all these mouths to feed. We should slow down the population a little bit and allow our productive forces to catch up. Maybe that's the case. In reality, it's probably a mixture of the two, right? There probably were real reasons for the one-child policy, and it was probably partly due to the influence of neo-Malthusian Western academics telling China that they needed to put a halt on their population in order to survive. Either way, one-child policy is not around anymore, and China's got the fastest growing economy on earth.
Time.
The Chinese seem to prefer to receive small groups with some definite purpose, which would benefit China as well as the visitor. They've shown no interest in receiving tourists.
One of the only ways to go there was to join a delegation. So, as a distinguished British person, he did. He and the others got to tour Beijing and sit down with the guy running the entire country in a televised chat. David Attenborough, ever the environment.
Running the entire country. I missed that the first time I watched this. I mean, I guess that's fair to say of Deng that he was running the entire country because he was the leader of the country, but it's a country of over 1 billion people. It can't just be run by one guy. But
environmentalist had a burning question for Deng, one he had never been asked by Western media before. He asked what China was planning to do about population growth. Deng said, at present, we are encouraging...
So you see, David Attenborough asked him what they're going to do about population growth. So clearly in the Western world, this was a thing, right? This idea that China's population is enormous. Their productive forces aren't that well advanced. What are they going to do about, exponential growth of their population? So it was, an idea in the West that possibly they, push towards China.
Married couples to have only one child, and material awards are given to those couples who only have one child.
So I think that kind of shows, the response that Dan gave to David Attenborough, that the China's one-child policy wasn't as draconian as it was portrayed as in the West, right? In the West, they say in China you couldn't have 2 children. If you did, one of the children was killed by the state and the communists, or they would leave it to die. And they would monitor people, and people had to hide their children from the state. But in reality, it was just the government providing material incentives for Chinese citizens to only have one child, and then expanding access to contraceptives, expanding access to birth control and education about birth control, as well as just, expanding access to education in general, for women in general, and providing, IUDs and providing birth control. And, religious minorities like the Uyghur population were exempt from the one-child policy because of their religious beliefs. These are the Uyghurs that the U.S. now says China is supposedly doing a genocide against. So they allowed them to be exempted from the one-child policy because of their religious views. So the sort of draconian picture, authoritarian picture of the one-child policy that we get in the West isn't entirely accurate.
Who only have one child. Just as an aside, I found this out by digging through an old transcript. I don't think anyone realizes that it was David Attenborough who scored one of the journalistic coups of the decade, confirmation that China had introduced the one-child policy.
Goodbye.
So what is the one?
I should have looked this up. Does anyone know? Does China call it the one-child policy, or is that a name that the West gave it? The West looked at China's birth control policies and said it was the one-child policy so they could portray it as this sort of draconian thing enforced from the top down.
Child policy. Why was it put in place? Well, in 1970, the average Chinese woman gave birth 6 times in her life. Child mortality was 10%, which is, of course, tragic. But it meant that most Chinese families had 5 or 6 kids. Chinese authorities saw this as a big, big problem. So they asked one of their most brilliant citizens to look at it, Song Jian. Song Jian had a reputation as a genius whose mind could be directed at any problem and solve it quickly. But he was...
You think they had one guy? You think this country of 1 billion people had one guy working on the population problem, or trying to figure out how the population would affect the economy? Like, this just shows that the West has no idea how things even work in China. Right? And this is why I'm always telling people to read the debate within the Communist Party. Read what the different Chinese scholars and Chinese communists are saying to each other, because it's not just one person, doing this analysis and making their economic policies. These are made collectively by groups of experts and by groups of economists, and with information given to them by party cadres who are in charge of each area. So every geographical area of China has a party cadre in charge of it, who reports back to the party and reports back to the central committee, so they can then make economic decisions based on the needs of the people in each geographic region. But you expect us to believe that China was like, we're wondering if we've got a problem with our population here. Let's just call up one guy and completely base all of our economic policy for the next 50 years off of what this one guy tells us. And you expect us to believe that's what that's what's leading to the inevitable collapse of China that you guys have predicted like 20 times in the past decade. Like, come on. Use some critical thinking here, hipster Kyle Kulinski.
Wasn't a demographer. He was a rocket scientist. The government asked him to look at the population problem. Working on it.
So they didn't even have demographers. They had one rocket scientist who they brought in to do all of the work related to the economy and the population. Does that sound like it's real? Does that sound like it's real? Ask yourself, when you hear propaganda like this, does that sound like something an actual country would do?
In his spare time, he predicted that the country's population would hit 4 billion in a century. Now, Song Jian might have been great at predicting the trajectory of missiles, but this trajectory was way off. He ignored the fact that throughout...
They actually had Jimmy Neutron. Jimmy Neutron determined what China's population policy should be, but he got it wrong, and now they're going to collapse inevitably. Just trust me.
In the 1970s, Chinese fertility plunged from 6 kids per woman to 2.5 kids per woman, thanks to access to family planning and better education. That's what happens literally everywhere in the world. If you send girls to school and give them access to contraception and abortions, they will have fewer kids. But Chinese authorities saw Song Jian's scary charts and implemented the one-child policy.
The greatest single threat to Chinese progress and development is people. There are millions too many, hundreds of millions too many.
The one-child policy was about increasing...
That's such a Malthusian idea that the number one obstacle to their development is people. Like, clearly that's not true, because China's been the fastest growing economy on Earth for like 70 years. But part of the reason they've been able to do that is because of their giant labor force, because of their people, because of the amount of people they have contributing to their society and contributing to production.
Productivity. I have 4 kids, and it affects my productivity a bit. The Chinese Communist Party wanted to see what would happen if everyone only had 1 kid.
We have to strongly advocate one child, one couple.
They didn't mess about. They wrote it into the country's constitution. They only allowed couples to marry after they turned 26.
In a nation of 1,000 million, the state decides when people can be married. This couple have promised the state they'll have only 1 child. That will be their contribution to population control.
And, it being the Chinese Communist Party, they monitored people to make sure that they didn't break the rules.
The penalties for having too many children, especially in the towns, can be severe. Work permits are withheld, and housing space becomes more difficult.
In each city neighbourhood, they set up a family planning clinic.
The state keeps records of the breeding potential and performance of all residents. Who's been sterilized? Who's taking the pill? Who's signed the promise to have no more children?
And this is something that you would think Western liberals would praise, right? Setting up birth control clinics in rural areas and all over China, but when they're using it to talk about China, they don't call it birth control, they call it sterilization. And they don't call it, family planning centers in different areas. Or maybe they do, but they say it was draconianly forced upon them by the government. It's not that they increased education of women and access to contraceptives and birth control education naturally as their society progressed and as their productive forces increased. Couldn't be that. It was that the government forced them all to be sterilized.
A government official proudly boasted.
And what's interesting, too, is a lot of Western academics nowadays do actually praise the one-child policy. They say that the fetter that was put on the population growth in China not only had positive effects for China's economy, but for the world economy. Now, I don't know about that. That might just be the neo-Malthusianism speaking. But, yeah, there's still a lot of Western academics who praise it.
So that the party had prevented the birth of 400 million people. In rural areas, people were sterilised against their will. In 1983 alone, authorities performed more than 20 million sterilisations and 15 million abortions. Children born in the
Sterilization is always the word they use too. Forced sterilizations are what the Falun Gong always says that China is doing to the Uyghurs, even though their population is growing faster than ever. They use the word sterilization. They don't say, the government provided material incentives for women who got their tubes tied after they had 1 child, or material incentives for women who got IUDs, which is what really was happening. They were saying if you have 1 child and then you get what's a very common procedure in America, vasectomies or getting your tubes tied. Vasectomies for men, tubes tied for women. I don't know what that procedure is actually called, or getting an IUD. The government was providing that for free and encouraging people to get those because of the policy. But they just say sterilization because that sounds bad. It sounds like the government's going in and, performing forced surgeries on people to sterilize them. But
1980s and 1990s in China became the first generation of only children.
The Chinese call them Xiao That means little emperors, a pejorative label for only children.
The population began to...
I'm actually so glad I'm not an only child. I'm so glad I have a brother and sister. It just, it affects you positively. No offense to the only children out there. Not to say you can't be a good only child.
Wildly male, as people avoided their only child being a girl with abortion, abandonment, or straight up murder.
These only children grow up without the tempering influence of brothers and sisters.
There are now millions of Chinese bachelors going to great lengths to make themselves more appealing to women. This phenomenon has actually driven up property prices, as owning an apartment is seen as a prerequisite for marriage. The one-child policy may have worked, but it was wildly unpopular. And by 2010, the Chinese Communist Party realised that it had worked a little bit too well. Their family planning policies had started a timer. They had a generation of workers unencumbered by lots of kids. But soon enough, their parents were going to retire, and they'd be back to square one. The working population would have too many old people to look after and not enough young people to work. Australian economist Ross Garnaut put it like this.
The big question that worries a lot of people in China is will China get old before it gets rich?
You can't control...
They're showing a whole lot of Western economists talking about China. A whole lot of Australian economists talking about China. How about some Chinese economists? How about, two Chinese economists with slightly different opinions on the one-child policy? No. We just want to hear Westerners talking about China. Why would we listen to the debate going on in China? Who would know China better than some guy in Australia?
How many old people you have? Well, I don't know about can't, but you definitely shouldn't. But the Chinese Communist Party began to ask, when should we let people start having more than one kid again? To answer that question, they would need really, really good data on how big the population was getting. No problem. That's what censuses are for, right?
The census will tell the Chinese government just how many people they have to look after, what social and political programs to develop, where to spend money, and where not to spend money.
But for a million different reasons, the authoritarian Chinese government incentivizes lying. Are you an official who wants more government funding sent to your area or a higher salary? Just invent a few people in your region and watch the money roll in.
So, this is so funny. The Chinese Communist Party is authoritarian. They monitor their people's every move. If you sneeze wrong in China, they throw you in a work camp. They're so authoritarian and draconian, it's a complete security state. But then, they also say China counted their people wrong, and it was super, super easy to lie to the government, and these people taking the census just lied so they could scam the government for more money. And then China thought, he's going to say China thought they had more people than they actually did, and that's why their economy is about to collapse. Trust me, bro. Right? So are they super authoritarian, and do they monitor their people's every move? Or are they incompetent and unable to even count their population? Which one is it?
You want more than one kid? Just have two, but don't tell anyone.
The parents, fearing the authorities, had simply kept the children at home and not informed the government.
What about if your grandpa dies, but you want to keep collecting his pension? Well, just don't tell the government that he's dead.
Dude, people do that with Social Security all the time. That's Social Security fraud. Don't tell people that your grandpa's dead and then just collect his checks. That's not exclusive to China. Oh my goodness, look at his face here. Looks like he's being possessed by a demon.
Keep cashing the checks. Easy. Are you a family planning official trying to justify continuing the one-child policy you championed? Just twiddle with a few metrics and watch the numbers go up. Thanks for all this meddling, some experts like Professor Yi Fuxian think the government was overestimating their population by 10%, creating more than 100 million imaginary people, mostly young imaginary people. In 2013, the new Chinese president Xi Jinping started to unwind the policy.
But under a new rule, couples will be allowed to have a second child if either parent has grown up as an only child.
Then everyone was allowed to have a second child. But there was a problem with that.
Maybe after 5 or 3 years, we can consider about that. But from now on, I think the only one child is enough for us.
The millennials were the best educated, most fawned over Chinese generation ever. And they wanted to raise their kids as little emperors too. Professor Yi Fuxian said people didn't want more kids. And even if they did, they now couldn't afford it.
If I have a second child, this apartment will be too small. We'll need to move somewhere bigger.
A top family planning official had projected that dropping the policy would lead people to start having 4-child families again. Problem solved. But people did not start having 4 kids.
When the one-child law was finally abolished, China experienced a small jump in the birth rate in 2016. But that was followed by a drop the next.
By the way, Yi Fuxian, the guy they're basing all their data on for this, or all their analysis, is one of these guys who's written a book about how China is going to collapse because of their population. So another one of these Malthusian sort of thinkers who's just trying to write a book about the collapse of China and have it boosted by mainstream media and make some money. And his books have been banned in China since 2013 for being riddled with misinformation.
Next year.
In fact, the birth rate continued to fall. Yi Fuxian had been right. In a panic, the Chinese government unbanned Yi Fuxian's book, cancelled his arrest warrant, and asked him to tour China talking about his findings. They hoped it would help convince people to have more kids, but it didn't. Things got worse. As recently as 2019, the UN projected that China's population would...
Oh, they did remove his ban. it looks like. Interesting.
Continue growing and wouldn't peak until the 2030s. But they quickly realized that was wrong. In fact, it peaked in 2022. Yi Fujian thinks it actually peaked back in 2018. Now, the population is shrinking, causing a shudder through the economy, which was expecting several more years of growth. So maybe you've been thinking, yes.
The other thing about these neo-Malthusian economists is they never actually give you any economic data, right? The shudder through China's economy, the collapse of China's economy, the decreasing productivity of their economy, the slowdown of their economy. He says all these things, but he never presents any economic data to prove that these things are true. All he does is say, this is what's going on with the population, and therefore it's having these negative effects on the economy. And when we go through the next article by John Ross explaining why China's economy isn't collapsing, you'll see it's the exact opposite. Basically, John Ross's entire article is economic data. It's him showing what the actual economic trends are in China, what their country is trending towards. What Malthusianism allows these sophists, or whatever you would want to call them, these propagandists, to do is just say population is doing this, therefore economy is inevitably going to do that. And they never have to actually tie the correlation together with statistics or economic data.
Yes, but when are you going to tell me what all this has to do with property and money and economic crises? Well, that'll be now. See, big property companies were building homes for the next generation of workers.
The Country Garden insists on the mode of fast development, fast sales, and carries out a positive management of high efficiency.
They've been borrowing hundreds of billions of dollars to build the apartments, confident that people in their 20s were about to leave home and buy them. The Chinese property industry is the biggest in the world. Fitch Ratings calls it the world's most important sector. It was a Ponzi scheme. It needed people to keep buying in and driving up prices, otherwise it wouldn't be able to pay off its debts. But the industry was building empty apartments for imaginary people. And cost of living pressures are hitting the non-imaginary ones. And now it's starting to crash. And this is having...
Do you see what they're doing there? It's total projection. They're saying that basically what happened with the 2008 financial crisis is going to happen in China. But what they don't realize, because Americans and Australians have no idea how China's actual economic system works, is that Chinese banks are state-owned. Right? Chinese banks aren't predatory. They're not like the American banks who are doing anything that they can to increase their profits and keep their bottom line high, and keep housing prices as high as they need to be, or sell enough houses, or give people enough housing loans and suck enough money out of people that way through them paying back loans with interest that you keep your bottom line high. And then, as the banks gave all these predatory loans to people to try and keep their profits high in 2008, eventually, the people taking loans from the bank to buy their housing couldn't pay back the loans with interest, and that's when the whole thing came crashing down, and we had the 2008 financial crisis. They're saying that's what's going to happen in China, but their banks are state-owned, right? Their banks aren't completely predatory. Their banks are designed to look out for what's in the interest of the entire economy, right? So they're not going to give these hyper-predatory loans the same way that Western banks did in order to keep their profits high. Right? Or they're not going to utilize debt in order to manipulate the market and consolidate their power and buy out other companies and bankrupt other companies, right? Because they're there to finance what the people need more so than being there to finance what makes them profit. So the entire structure of the Chinese financial system is different, which is why, Kyle Kulinski, in 2008, China had after the crisis, they had the only economy on earth that had an increase, or that was still increasing. Their economy was still growing. The growth rate had been greatly slowed because the economic crash affected all the countries, and it affected all of China's trade partners. But their economy continued to grow during that time because they have all these central planning methods and all these nationalized parts of the financial sector and all these forms of economic central planning that were able to stabilize the economy and ensure that it didn't come crashing down like the capitalist economy. This shows the economic superiority of socialism. But now they're saying, eventually, just wait, the same thing's going to happen to China. But it's not. It's not. But will these guys ever apologize? Will they ever issue a retraction? Will they ever say we're wrong about China? No. No, they've been publishing these kind of articles and these kind of videos and these kind of books for years, saying that the inevitable collapse of China is on its way. They've never stopped doing it. Peter Zeihan has been doing it for 20 years now, and he has no shame. Continues to do it. Just recently did it on Joe Rogan, the largest podcast in America. They're shameless liars and propagandists. This guy's probably just a puppet for MSNBC, but whether he knows it or not, he's propagandizing the American people and pushing them towards a new Cold War or maybe even an eventual hot war with China. Hopefully not. But
An impact in Australia too. See, apartment buildings are built with steel, and steel is made from iron ore. So what does this mean for the country that makes its living selling iron ore to China? Well, that's why the ABC has a business news department.
So he basically is saying that Australia won't be able to sell China as much iron because they don't need as many residential houses anymore. So that doesn't really prove China's about to collapse, though, or China's on the verge of collapse. But theoretically, Marxism believes that societies are based on production, right? How we produce and reproduce our means of life. So most of the time we think about this in terms of labor, right? Humans labor, humans do activity to take nature and transform nature into what we need to survive, into our means of subsistence, right? This is production. Every society is based on production. But that's only one kind of production. There's also reproduction, meaning sexual reproduction, meaning the reproduction of human life, having babies, which is also necessary to continuing society, right? So in China, this is based on what I was reading. There's more of a precedent for making those kind of decisions collectively, right? Making decisions of reproduction as well as regular production based on what's needed for the whole of society and keeping the whole society going. Whereas in Western individualist liberal societies, of course, it's, no. If you stop somebody from having more than one child, that's an infringement on their human rights and on their individual rights. They should be able to have as many kids as they want with as many people as they want. That's freedom. So it also kind of shows the collectivist mindset versus the individualist mindset when it comes to reproduction. But not that I think people's, choices should be controlled in that realm. But if China did make the one-child policy because their productive forces hadn't yet advanced to the point where they could feed all the people who needed food, it makes sense that they would provide material incentives to try and keep the population from growing exponentially. Right, allow our productive forces to develop, allow our agricultural production to develop. Once we can feed everybody, then we can get rid of these limits on reproduction. But reproduction is important from a Marxist perspective. That's the one thing I wanted to point out. It's not everything like the Malthusians say, but versus Malthusianism, as we explained in the video, they just say all of your economic success or failure is based on the size of your population and nothing else. And then they bring up no economic data, unlike the Marxists. I believe I don't know if John Ross calls himself a Marxist, but his analysis is essentially Marxist, who bring up a lot of economic data. So this is his article that we just published on MidwesternMarx.com. The news is full of headlines about China's economic collapse. Ignore them. So ignore the 15-minute video that we just debunked from ABC. It's a bunch of lies. Once again, the Western media establishment, and sadly some on the left, are talking up an impending economic disaster in China, when the truth is quite the opposite. In the last 4 years, covering the period of the COVID pandemic, China's economy has grown 2.5 times as fast as the U.S., 15 times as fast as France, 23 times as fast as Japan, 45 times as fast as Germany, and 480 times as fast as Britain. To add in smaller G7 countries, China has grown 4 times as fast as Canada and 11 times as fast as Italy. China's outperformance of advanced capitalist countries is even greater in per capita terms, a still better measure of productivity changes and potential for increasing living standards. China's per capita GDP grew 3 times as fast as the US, 5 times as fast as Italy, 44 times as fast as Japan or France, and 260 times as fast as Britain, while per capita GDP fell in Germany and Canada. China's outperformance of developing capitalist countries shows the same pattern. China's per capita 4.4% GDP annual average growth compares to 2.6% in India, 1.3% in Brazil, or 0.9% in South Africa. What is important about such economic growth, of course, is not abstract statistics, but its meaning for the real lives of ordinary people. Facts. The International Labor Organization data on real inflation-adjusted wages show that up to the latest available data for most countries in 2022 and for India in 2021, China's annual real wage growth was 4.7%. The real annual wage growth, which I've actually seen Western economists take this and say that labor costs are increasing because they always give things from the perspective of the bourgeoisie, from the perspective of capitalists. So it's not wages, which is what it is from the perspective of the workers. They call it labor costs, and they say labor costs are increasing. Surely China's about to collapse is one of the things that Peter Zeihan says. Oh, you mean wages are increasing? That sounds like it's a good thing, Peter. For Britain, it was 0.1, the US 0.3, France 0.4, Germany minus 0.7, India minus 1.3%. Given this enormous economic outperformance of China, or by China of capitalist countries, any rational discussion that should be taking place in Western mainstream media about the international economic situation would be, why is China's economy hugely outperforming the U.S. and the rest of the capitalist West? And what lessons are to be learned from China's socialist economy that is outperforming us so? For the left, the issue needs to be assessed and publicized the issue that does need to be assessed and publicized is, why are real wages raising 18 times faster in China than the U.S. and 44 times faster than Britain, while real wages are falling in other advanced capitalist countries? Indeed, the present author would argue that a much greater stress should be placed on the latter point. The international left has begun to absorb that China has lifted more than 850 million people out of poverty. In 40 years, by far the greatest poverty reduction achievement in human history, but it has not yet internalized how rapidly not only the poorest but average living standards are rising in China, far faster than in any Western country. But of course, this real economic situation can't be discussed in the mainstream media because its conclusions would be too damaging for the capitalist West. Instead, a type of mad discussion is unfolding, with U.S. claims about China's economy becoming increasingly bizarre. One might say deranged as they get further and further out of touch with reality. Kind of like the video that we just watched, bringing up no economic data, just bringing up some population statistics and saying that because of the one-child policy, the so-called one-child policy 50 years ago, China is now going to inevitably collapse. Totally deranged, totally out of touch with reality, totally just wishful thinking on behalf of the capitalist West and the propagandists. President Joe Biden, for example, recently made a speech claiming China's economic growth rate is around 2%, when it was 5.5% in the first half of this year. And as already noted, China's economy is growing 2.5 times as fast as the U.S. Biden bizarrely claimed that in China, the number of people who are of retirement age is larger than the number of people of working age, which is such a ridiculous thing to even say. But it's entirely false and an inaccurate figure, or inaccurate by a figure of many hundreds of millions of people. So they're just literally pulling these population statistics out of their ass to try and explain away the unbelievable economic growth in China and the poverty alleviation programs in China. Discussion in the U.S. financial media equally refuses to face real facts. Because I am an economist, every morning after the overall news, I switch on Bloomberg TV to catch up on the latest economic data. Discussion there is like Alice Through the Looking Glass. The book, the principle of which is that everything is reversed compared to the real world. Exactly. It's a topsy-turvy, upside-down world. I like that analysis of Through the Looking Glass. Apparently, according to Bloomberg's analysis, China's annual average of 4.5% a year growth in the last 4 years is an economy in severe crisis, whereas the U.S.'s 1.8% is allegedly strong. Not to speak of Britain's 0.1. Similar rhetoric, out of all contact with factual reality, pervades the Financial Times, The Economist, or the Wall Street Journal, of course. The left is used to such U.S. political lying. The completely fake claim excuse me, that the North Vietnamese ships attacked U.S. naval vessels on August 4th in the Gulf of Tonkin used to launch the Vietnam War. The equally untrue claim that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction to justify the U.S. invasion were classic examples. Great, because we know, of these famous cases of the U.S. media lying, but we don't realize how they lied to us about, say, economic data, or how they lied to us about countries like China on a daily basis, right? Almost every so-called leftist or socialist, or even a lot of non-politically, a lot of people who don't have their nose in politics every day know that the U.S. lied us into the Iraq War, right? But a lot of them don't realize that the media is still lying to us on a daily basis, even about smaller things or things that seem to be less important. Today, the U.S. systematically lies about the state of China and its own economy because it is crucial for U.S. capitalism to prevent its own citizens and close allies from understanding the real economic trends. Yes, if people understood what China was doing, they would demand tomorrow that our country start moving towards an economic model more similar to China's, an economic model that invests in production, invests in infrastructure, invests in the people, and raising the American working class out of poverty and increasing their living standards. It's further proof, if one were needed, of the truth that if the real world and a theory do not coincide, only one of two things can be done. One is abandon the theory. The other is to abandon the real world. Oh, that's so good. And these guys really can't abandon this theory that China is about to collapse. Even though the real world keeps telling them their theory is wrong, they keep beating the American public over the head with this idea. In this case, the theory is that the U.S., because it is capitalist, should outperform socialist China. They should. In the minds of these neoclassical economists, they should, so therefore we'll just say that they are. The real world is actual economic performance in which China continues to outperform the U.S. and other capitalist countries by an enormous margin. Unable to abandon its theory, the U.S. is therefore forced to abandon the real world, hence the demented denial of the comparative economic performance noted at the beginning of this article. While the left should expect lies from capitalism, what is rather shameful is that some sections of the left repeat such nonsense, apparently believing that if they put a few left phrases into an analysis taken from the Western press, this constitutes socialist commentary. For example, an article in the New Left Review sidecar called China, a Zombie Economy. Some zombie when China's economy is growing anywhere between 2.5 times and 480 times as fast as any major capitalist economy. No kidding. The real data shows that the reality is simple. China has far outgrown any Western capitalist economy for more than 40 years, and it continues to do so. The result in China is by far the world's most rapid rise in living standards, not only for the poorest, but for the whole average population. It is known as the practical advantage of socialism. It is fact. We know why the U.S. has to make up big lies about it. There is no justification for sections of the left echoing them. Absolutely. Absolutely. Those Vaushites of the world, the leftists, the so-called socialists who are condemning China and condemning China's poverty alleviation and parroting State Department talking points about China, pull your head out of your butt. Stop making yourself a tool. Start reading articles like this and stop watching articles like that ABC News clip that we just played. You know why the ABC News clip and Peter Zeihan and all these goofballs in the Western press predicting that China's collapse is inevitable? You know why they don't cite any economic data? Because if they did, as John Ross showed here, if they brought up any of this economic data, it would destroy their argument. People would see, oh, wow, China's economy is actually growing much faster than ours. Their people are retiring much sooner because they're more prosperous and they're actually able to. They have much less poverty, far less homelessness. They have public transportation and all these other amenities that we don't have in the U.S. Their economy is far outperforming ours, but they don't want to do that. They just want to claim that China is inevitably going to collapse. So the one data point that they use is population size. And this is what Malthusianism allows them to do, is explain away what's actually going on with China's real economy. Just ignore everything that's going on with China's economic growth and say, well, it's all going to collapse soon because of their population, right? We're not going to explain the correlation between economic collapse or economic downturns and population. We're just going to say that a collapse is inevitable and leave it at that. And that's what the Malthusian ideology allows bourgeois propagandists to do. And that's why Malthusianism and neo-Malthusianism is being embraced more and more by the American ruling class, and why it needs to be combated by us Marxists, right? Be aware of this Malthusian ideology, this ideology that says the population's growing too fast. It's growing too fast. We have to shut down the farms. We have to not produce. We have to have less people, less people, less people. That is Malthusianism. We don't need less people. We need more control of production. We need less capitalism. Gordon Chang, that's the guy. Yes. He's the guy who in 2001 wrote a book saying that China's collapse was inevitable. And he's never apologized for it or never said, yeah, I was wrong. I pulled all that out of my ass. He just goes around spreading more anti-China, anti-communist propaganda for the Western media and cashing checks. Jackson Hinkle said the U.S. must liberate Canada based. Thank you so much for the $2 super chat from Religion of Peace. Really appreciate that. The super chats and our YouTube members, which Religion of Peace is also a YouTube member, and our Patreon supporters are how we fund the website. That's how we fund our project completely. We have no outside donors. We have no big money donors. We're the People's Institute. So really, really appreciate people who give us these super chats or who support our Patreon each month. If you do support our Patreon, you get to join our Discord. Even if you're just a $1 patron, you can join the Discord and we will never kick you out. YouTube members also get access to our Discord. Twitch subscribers do too, I think. But yeah, we'll never kick you out. And then if you're a $10 member, you get access to Carlos's book, The Purity, Fetish, and the Crisis of Western Marxism. For $10 YouTube members, that's available in our community tab. For $10 Patreon supporters, that is available on the Patreon. So yeah, appreciate you all and appreciate you funding our institute because we believe this work is important. This video was like a DPR cable collapse script, but changed to China because they are the main threat now. Show something else because this is making me dumber. Yes, we're done with that video. No worries, Battle Cossack. Thank you so much for the 50 Argentinian dollars super chat. Appreciate you. Yeah, it's the same narrative repeated over and over and over again. It's literally like they're copy pasting, right? They're just copy pasting. And they're like copy pasting Robert Thomas Malthus's analysis that Marx destroyed from the 1700s, right? Where he's saying that explaining away the role of capitalism in creating the famine in India by saying, look at their population numbers. There's a huge population in India. Of course there was a famine. Don't blame capitalism. Don't blame the British colonizers hoarding the food. It couldn't be their fault. Thank you, Sebastian. Going to be busy today, unfortunately, so I can't join the stream, but looking forward to watching it back. Solidarity. Thank you, Sebastian, so much. Constant supporter of the show. I'm hoping to actually... Sebastian's always watching our show, and he's always sending me videos in the Discord to react to. He might have sent me that ABC video I reacted to just now. I can't remember if that was him or someone else. But I'm hoping to bring him on as an actual producer or an actual showrunner and help us organize the show and what videos we're going to react to every day, because I can't think of anyone better to do that than a member of the audience who's constantly giving me videos to react to anyways. So shout out to Sebastian. Let's hear it for him. Discord is way too chaotic for me. It was for me at first too. I figured it out now though. He is Ukraine's strongest soldier. Who, Vaush? Yes. Yes, he's a warrior for the Slava Ukraini cause. Big claps. Yay. All right, y'all. I want to play this video, but I have to pee so bad. So we're going to watch Bernie and Cornell West going back and forth about the 2024 election. Bernie obviously saying that... we need to get behind Biden and support Biden to protect democracy because of the lesser of two evils.
You suck. You suck.
So we'll react to that as soon as I'm back from this good politics guy. But I do have to pee first, so let me pull something up. We'll pull up my self-wrestling. This'll do. BRB. Am I winning? How did I do? Oh, the arm spin. I think I ended up tech falling this guy. They gave him 2 for that, that was the wrong call. That was not 2 points, ref. Not even close to a correct throw. Silly goose. All right, let's go into this now. So Bernie recently, not recently, he endorsed Biden from the beginning, right? And he was asked, why isn't he endorsing his friend Cornell West, who supported Bernie's campaign every step of the way? So you'd think that Bernie would want to return the favor to his good friend Cornell West, but no. He said that we need to get behind Biden. We need to back Biden. We need to protect democracy. Which, Bernie, bro, they literally rigged 2 primaries against you. The DNC collaborated, and big money especially collaborated, and even more so than that, the American news media collaborated to bash you and destroy your campaign and make sure that the American people don't even get a little bit of socialism, make sure they don't even get health care. Right? You're really going to come out here and say that we have a democracy under Joe Biden and that we need to vote for Joe Biden to protect democracy. Buddy, they're already rigging the elections. They rigged 2 elections against you. So now it's time to be strong. It's time to be a man and stand up and say, vote for Cornell West, because this 2-party duopoly is just going to rig elections against us on behalf of the ruling class, on behalf of the economic elites, on behalf of the shareholders on Wall Street. And the finance capitalists. And you need to vote for Cornell West so that the third party candidacy can gain some steam and can start eventually getting federal funding and can eventually get on the debate stage and can spread socialist ideas far and wide and point out that this country isn't a democracy, that 93% of elections in this country are determined by the candidate who raises the most money, that the media is so propagandistic and so consolidated into the hands of the finance capitalists and the ruling elites that it would make any so-called dictatorship that the U.S. has targeted look good, right? The U.S. media is the most propagandistic media in the world. So we don't have democracy. And the idea that we need to vote for Joe Biden, who was part of rigging the election against Bernie and who's sending all our tax dollars to fascists in Ukraine, the idea that we need to vote for him to save democracy and fight fascism is really, really ridiculous. And I ain't going to do it. I'm voting for Cornell West. I know a whole lot of people in my audience are with me because we put our effort in. I literally put all the effort I could into that Bernie campaign in 2020. I truly believed that Bernie was going to give us a political revolution, you know, and we were going to deal a huge blow to the corrupt elites and the establishment. And then, you know, it fizzled out. Bernie completely cucked himself to Biden, endorsed Biden, told everybody to support Biden. And, you know, then we came to find out that the DNC had been collaborating against us, and that and we knew the whole time that the corporate media was collaborating against us. So after that, after I tried putting all my effort into changing the Democratic Party or having a revolution in the Democratic Party and it didn't work, like, okay, we got to change tactics, right? The Democratic Party never called itself a socialist party. They're pretty honest that they're a party of the bourgeoisie. They're a party of the ruling elites. They're economic donors. So why are we as socialists, we as people trying to organize the working class, confining ourselves to working within the Democratic Party, right? We need to work outside of the Democratic Party and get to the people, get to the masses, which is what Cornell West is trying to do, which is why Bernie Sanders should be a man and stand up and endorse his campaign, even if he doesn't think it's going to win, right? Even if he's not going to beat Biden and Trump. But still do it because it'll allow us to share socialist ideas to the working masses and get in their heads the idea of working outside the two-party duopoly and actually advancing class struggle in this country, which is what matters. The Democrats beating the Republicans doesn't matter. Your life is going to be the same regardless for the most part. Advancing class struggle is what gets gains for workers, and that's what Cornell West is trying to do. So enough of me rambling. Let's get into this video from Good Politic Guy. Bernie and Cornell West spar over Biden's 2024 run.
All right. So Senator Bernard Sanders and Dr. Cornell West, two men who honestly have a great deal of influence over the development of my own politics and obviously awakening a lot of American people to the injustices of the U.S. political and economic systems, have sort of been going at it over the last couple of days, with Cornell West obviously launching his third-party bid with the Green Party to challenge Joe Biden and potentially Donald Trump in the Republican Party. And obviously him and Bernie Sanders are sort of fighting over Bernie's recent endorsement and early endorsement of President Joe Biden. So I just want to go ahead and hop in here with Bernie Sanders sitting down with CNN's Dana Bash to sort of respond to some of Cornell West comments, and then I'll give you guys my thoughts on this entire situation. So let's go ahead and watch this.
There's Cornell West, who is a close ally of yours. He is running a third-party campaign for president. He recently criticized you for endorsing President Biden's re-election. Listen to what he said.
He says Cornell West is a close ally of Bernie's. That's what makes me so mad. Because Cornell West, even though he had disagreements with Bernie, he backed his campaign every step of the way because he recognized it as the best campaign at the time. Right. And he didn't run for president that year because he recognized that we had an actual Democratic socialist running within the Democratic Party. And that was OK that year. But that failed. Now it's time to move outside of the duopoly, Bernie.
I love the brother. And you know, even in love, people have deep disagreements about these things. But I think, again, he's fearful of the neo-fascism of Trump. People look at Biden. They don't really want to tell the full truth. He's created the best economy that we can get. Is this the best that we can get? You're going to tell that lie to the people just for Biden to win?
What's your reaction to that?
Well, my reaction is...
You want to know my reaction? Based.
So this certainly is not the best economy that we can create. That was what my speech was about yesterday. We've got to join the rest of the industrialized world, guarantee health care to all. We've got to cut the cost of prescription drugs in half. We've got to raise the minimum wage to at least $17 an hour. We've got to build the affordable housing we desperately need. But where I disagree with my...
We got to nationalize the entire healthcare industry. We have to seize the means of production for the working mass. We have to take political power for the proletariat.
My good friend, Cornell West, is I think in these really very difficult times where there is a real question whether democracy is going to remain in the United States of America. You know,
Remain. Will democracy remain? What democracy, bruh? Do you forget the presidential debates when they asked all the other Democratic candidates, all the other corrupt candidates, like, oh, you know, we recently saw you with your cat Fluffy. That was very cute. What does family mean to you? What does your cat Fluffy mean to you? Throwing them the biggest softball questions. Then they would get to Bernie and they'd be like, so you want to implement Medicare for all? This sounds a lot like Fidel Castro's Cuba. Do you want to start murdering American citizens in Central Park because you're an evil communist? They did everything they could to spin Bernie like he was this evil, authoritarian, communist warlord, you know, coming for the American people, just because he wanted to give us freaking health care. Just because he wanted to implement Medicare for all, which is a half measure, a policy that the rest of the industrialized world already has, right? For that, they demonized him and treated him like he was evil and tried to turn the entire country against him. And even that wasn't enough because the DNC had to collaborate to rig the election against him. Right? But we have a democracy. We have a democracy when you can't even fight for very basic things like healthcare without the entire establishment and all their money and all their power descending upon you to crush you. It's not a democracy. And they apparently, Bernie, they were successful in crushing you. Because look at you now, simping for this neoliberal party of warmongers that is the Democratic Party. Instead of standing up for your friend and a real fighter for the people, someone who isn't broken by the neoliberal establishment, Cornell West. And it's interesting. Cornell West says what we need in America are people who are fortified, right? People who are actually willing to fight for socialism, to fight for the people, to fight for justice in the long term, right? He doesn't want people who are in and out, right? They get excited about politics, they help for a little bit, and then they never think about it again. Right? Or he doesn't want people who can have their backs broken by the neoliberals, who get attacked by the neoliberals and all of a sudden say, I'm sorry. Vote Democrat, like Bernie's doing right now. Be a fighter. Don't be a wimp like this. Learn from Bernie's mistakes.
Donald Trump is not somebody who believes in democracy, whether women are going to be able to continue to control their own bodies, whether we have social justice in America, we end bigotry. Around that, I think we've got to bring the entire progressive.
How is Biden going to end bigotry? There was literally a school shooting by a ethno-nationalist that happened last year who had been directly inspired by the Azov battalion and by the Biden-funded neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Right? You're not going to end bigotry until you get rid of class exploitation. And, you know, also, we could get into Biden's personal life if you want. He gave the eulogy at Strom Thurmond's funeral. He was best buddies with a literal segregationist. Watch Biden talking about the 3 strike laws and harsher prison sentences for nonviolent drug offenders in the early 2000s. That dude Biden was one of the architects of the drug war. He wasn't just complicit in it. He helped write the freaking crime bill. There's so many black Americans who are sitting in a jail cell right now for a nonviolent drug offense because of Joe Biden, while Joe Biden's son has been running around smoking crack and collecting money from all these firms that he gets to sit on the board of because he's Joe Biden's son. But that guy's going to end racism? Like, get out of here. You know this isn't true, Bernie. You're not this stupid. You're just cucked by the Democrats, and it's the saddest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Community to defeat Trump or whoever the Republican nominee will be, support Biden, but at the same time, which is what I did yesterday, is demand that the Democratic Party, not just Biden, have the guts to take on corporate greed and the massive levels of income and wealth inequality that we see today.
Okay, so we're going to get to another Cornell West.
I kind of like this guy. I'm interested to see what he has to say.
Follow up here when he went over on The Rising to basically respond to this Bernie Sanders segment. But I mean, so far, basically my take on this is that, am I surprised that Bernie Sanders chose to endorse Joe Biden, or am I surprised that Bernie Sanders chose not to endorse Cornell West with a third-party Green Party bid? No, absolutely not. I mean, Bernie Sanders, obviously, he campaigned for Hillary Clinton after he lost the 2016 Democratic primary. He campaigned for Joe Biden after losing the 2020 Democratic primary. I mean, as far as I know, he hasn't ever, endorsed a Green Party or a third-party candidate over the Democrat.
I mean, Cornell West wanted Bernie to run third party in 2020, when Bernie, endorsed Biden, Cornell West was like, what are you doing? You have all this momentum. And I believe he said this. I was less involved in 2016 than I was in 2020. Directly involved with the campaign and just paying attention. I liked Bernie in 2016, but I was still in high school. I voted for him for sure and voted for him in the Wisconsin primary. But regardless, Cornell West wanted him to run third party, right? He was saying you have all these people backing you, right? You have all these people who are demanding a political revolution. If a third party gets 5% of the vote, they get federal funding. And if they get 15% or whatever, they're on the debate stage. Use your giant base of support to do that, to fight for something new, to deal a huge blow to the duopoly. But Bernie didn't have it in him. He didn't have it in him. As we're seeing now, he's, at the end of the day, he's a Democrat, not a real socialist. He ain't a Lenin or even a Corbyn.
Nominee. So it's not really surprising in that sense, but I'll get to my take in terms of how Bernie Sanders has acted towards like Marianne Williamson, for example, who is running in the Democratic primary here in a second. But first, let's just go ahead and check in with Cornell West on what exactly his thoughts are on Bernie Sanders' statement there.
Well, no, I think that Brother Bernie's being consistent. He said that all along, and I can understand the argument. I think it's a plausible argument. I just don't think it's a persuasive one. I think that the argument he's making means that there's never any possibility for breaking from the corporate duopoly. There's never any possibility of trying to speak to the needs of poor and working people. I'm fresh from Mississippi, as you all probably know, there in Rankin County with Brother Jenkins and Brother Parker. I was there, the precious mother of Jenkins, Mary, and those lawyers down there, Brother Malik and Brother Trent. They are dealing with issues that the Democratic Party won't touch, which is issues of poverty and intense police brutality. And we haven't even got to the military adventurism abroad. So I think in many ways, Brother Bernie's making a plausible argument, but I think deep down in his heart, he knows that the Democratic Party has no fundamental intention of speaking to the needs of poor people and working people. They are dominated by the corporate wing. They're dominated by the militarists when it comes to foreign policy, and that he and AOC and the others are going to be, in a certain sense, window dressing at worst and at best, people to appeal to every 4 years. But the Democratic Party is beyond redemption at this point.
Based? Man. I was going to say, I don't really even agree with him that Bernie's making a plausible argument because, Bernie himself has been screwed by the undemocratic nature of our system and by the bourgeoisie and by the Democratic Party directly. So it's not that plausible. I thought Cornell was going a little soft on him, but then he really gets to the heart of it, right? AOC and Bernie Sanders have become nothing but window dressing for the imperialists, for the imperialist Democratic Party. So they can say, look, we have diversity of thought. We have socialists in our party. When those socialists, they won't do force the vote because they're too afraid of offending Nancy Pelosi and the other Democratic establishment figures. They won't endorse a third party candidate. They won't do anything to rock the boat. They won't go against the funding of the proxy war in Ukraine, right? When it comes to things that the establishment really wants, that the ruling class really wants, and that the Democratic Party wants, they side with the Democratic Party every time, right? So what are they then other than a distraction, other than window dressing for the Democratic Party? It's a perfect way to put it.
Okay, so I mean, again, I think honestly both of them are right in different ways. I think that Bernie is right in the sense that if Joe Biden was the only Democratic potential option for 2024, then it would make sense to sort of, especially if you live in a swing state or some important key state in the next election, to rally behind him. I sort of understand the argument that he is going for there because, I think Bernie understands, I think Cornell West understands that Cornell West is not going to like outright win the 2024, presidential election. Obviously, there is that goal of getting him to a 5% threshold so you can get that additional federal funding. I think that is totally a legitimate and ambitious goal to get to in terms of supporting the third-party ambitions in the United States. Obviously, I am not a supporter of either political party. I do think that we need more options here in the United States. Part of the issue with that is that we don't have things like ranked choice voting. We don't really have a legitimate potential for a third party to win at the national level. So I do understand sort of that aspect of it. But then I also understand Cornell West's argument here, which is that, yeah, of course, Bernie Sanders can go out there and sort of do his stump speech and, reference things like universal health care. And now I guess he's bumped up from a $15 to a $17 per hour minimum wage in the United States of America. But at the same time, it's like Joe Biden, the Democratic Party broadly, they're not fighting for those things. I mean, Joe Biden ran in 2020 on the, public option, and he hasn't even mentioned that a single goddamn time since he's been elected as the president. So obviously,
dude, it's so bad. He won't even bring up the public option anymore. Like, come on. Come on, they won't even bring up the healthcare policy that was thought up by Mitt Romney in a think tank. Like, they won't even bring up the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act isn't even close to enough to changing our healthcare system and reforming our healthcare system and making it better. Medicare for all isn't even enough. That's still a half measure in and of itself. But we can't, not only can we not get Biden to fight for Medicare for all, can't even get him to fight for that, Obamacare. Like, bro, I'm not voting for these people. I'm not supporting these people. I'm supporting the other socialist in the election who's going to spread socialist ideas about how to fix this country and fix the downtrodden state of the American working class. I'm backing Cornell West. Screw Joe Biden. He hasn't done anything to earn our vote. Enough of this. Enough of this. We need to vote for the people rigging democracy in order to save democracy. It's ridiculous. Won't do it again. The thing about AOC that like made me realize, oh, okay, she like literally might have been a plant the entire time, or she's not, on our side, was not even just force the vote, right? Force the vote was crazy. The more I learned about it, the more I'm like, why are they not doing this? Right? Why are they saying that force the vote wouldn't bring about anything when force the vote is actually a great idea? It's them leveraging the little power that they have within Congress to push for Medicare for all. The main policy that Americans need right now is 40,000 people are dying every year in this country because they don't have access to basic health insurance. Right? And they were giving all these excuses for why they couldn't do it. I'm like, that's just weird. Then AOC said, when she was recently asked about what the Republicans were doing, right, withholding their vote for Kevin McCarthy in order to try and get some concessions from the other Republicans, they said, AOC, this is kind of like force the vote. Why can't the Democrats do this? Why can't the squad do this? Why can't the left wing of the Democratic Party, or the supposed left wing of the Democratic Party, use the power that they have to try and push for their main policy for Medicare for all? And she said, well, look at the relational harm that's being caused within the Republican Party by this. Look at the relational harm, meaning the relationship between Republican politicians. That's why she couldn't fight for Medicare for all. That's why she couldn't fight for health care for Americans. Because it might have caused relational harm within the Democratic Party. Because Nancy Pelosi and her corrupt cabal and Chuck Schumer might have got mad at her. They might have been angry with her and scolded her. So she couldn't, sorry, Americans. Sorry, people who voted for me. Sorry, people who donated $2 to my campaign, even though it was all the money that they had because they believed I was actually going to fight for them. You don't get health care. 40,000 of you are going to continue to die every year because you don't have health care, because I don't want to piss off Nancy Pelosi. Because I have to be popular within the Democratic Party. Like, are you kidding me? That's not why anyone voted for you. It's not why anyone donated to your campaign. They did it because you promised to be different, because you promised to fight the Democratic Party and fight on behalf of the American working people and fight for health care. And you're going to tell us to piss off now that you're actually elected, now that you're actually making good money, because you don't want to anger Nancy Pelosi? Like, you are scum. Honestly. I would rather you at least tell me what you are. I'd rather you be like Lindsey Graham and just be like, yeah, I'm a neocon, and then do neocon shit, right? Rather than be like, I'm a democratic socialist, but I can't fight for healthcare for you because I might piss off the most corrupt politician in human history, Nancy Pelosi. These people are such wimps. They get into Congress and they just try to be well-liked. They just immediately become like the other lizard people around them. Can't take it. AOC is controlled opposition and plays there to subvert socialism. It looks more and more like that every day. And she had some really weird jobs at the beginning of her career, like a political consultant, right? And she was pitched as a bartender, but that wasn't what she did her whole life, right? She was involved in politics her whole life. So it is sketchy. I'm not saying she's a plant, but even if she's not, she might as well be. She does the work of a plant. She literally, that's what Americans identify socialism as now. She makes our job so much harder as socialists because so many people think socialism is just AOC showing up at the Met Gala with a dress that says tax the rich. Let's watch AOC's sunscreen video. Where can I find this? We went from Medicare for all to sunscreen.
I mean, if I can just get some business just out of the way firsthand. Sure. I mean, yeah, thank you for letting me come on and cover the segments, but
here from AOC, important worksheet.
To talk about sunscreen, specifically U.S. sunscreen and how to fix it. Hello, everyone. This is Rep AOC, and I'm here with Charlotte Palomino.
I'm a brand owner, but also a licensed esthetician. U.S. sunscreen.
I'm a brand owner. What a great person for a socialist to be hanging out with. Why go talk to working class people in your district when you can hang out with a sunscreen capitalist? When you can be cucked by big sunscreen.
Regulations are not necessarily making us more safe or better products.
U.S. sunscreens are far behind the rest of the world. I was in South Korea earlier this year, and it is so clear.
I was in occupied Korea earlier this year. And rather than thinking about when our country split Korea in half and killed 20% of North Korea's population and kept them under stringent economic sanctions ever since to try and starve their people, rather than thinking about that and how I can dismantle the U.S. empire, I was thinking about how nice the South Korean sunscreen was. Or rather than thinking about the economic degradation of people in South Korea and the mass poverty in occupied Korea, which is what South Korea is, U.S. occupied Korea. Rather than thinking about that, what we can do to fix it, I was like, this sunscreen's awesome. This will be my new cause. Now I won't have to talk about Medicare for all anymore. I can talk about UV rays.
Clear how far advanced the rest of the world is on sunscreen, and we deserve better here in the U.S.
How does the FDA regulate?
FDA is different than the rest of the world in that we regulate sunscreen as a drug instead of a cosmetic. It's regulated as a drug, has far more stringent standards, far more testing, far more scientific and clinical trials that are required, which is good. We want to make sure that things are safe. However, sometimes that can add a lot of bureaucratic and costs that prevent us from getting any.
You sound kind of like a Republican.
So why don't you do? So why not do this with insulin? Right? Why not try to make it so we mass produce insulin for people with diabetes? That's a huge problem in America right now. Is people having to ration their insulin or not being able to get insulin. Why is the focus on sunscreen? Maybe I'm nitpicking here, but like when she brings up that bureaucratic regulation. You know, that's one of the excuses that they use to not bring insulin in and other life-saving drugs from Canada. Is there's not enough clinical trials on them or there's not enough regulation. When Canada has stricter regulation than us and they can still, you know, they still manage to keep universal health care and provide insulin to everyone. I don't know.
Republican.
Well, I mean that, but also, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if we should play the rest of this video because you know what this sounds like to me? This sounds like medical misinformation, right? I mean, the FDA, I will have AOC know, I don't know when she became a Trump supporter and you sort of, you know.
She is arguing for deregulation. That's so funny. Sorry to the Do Dissidents, guys. They're great. Go ahead and subscribe to them. I'm going to subscribe to them right now and give their video a like because I know they're good. I've watched their videos before. I'm going to skip to the part where AOC's talking, though, and then we'll listen to some of their commentary.
Viewers come away misinformed about. All right, now that we have that out of the way, we can let this go on.
at all. And just for context, it has been since 1999. It was the last time that we had a new sunscreen filter in the United States.
When we compare the U.S. standards to European standards in 2017, a Sloan Kettering study found that only half of U.S. sunscreens met European protection standards. Here's the thing, though. There is something that we can do about this. Congress has not been very aware of this issue, which is...
So I don't get it. If our sunscreen's worse, how is deregulating it going to help? I don't get. I don't understand.
Why there hasn't been a lot of momentum behind this issue. Truly, it's not too corny. Please contact your member of Congress, especially if your member of Congress sits on the Energy and Commerce Committee. They have jurisdiction over the FDA. However, any member of Congress can develop attention and draw attention to this issue.
Okay, why? Okay, once again, I just have to say, I strongly advise against this. So you want your followers to call Congress. You just posted the phone number of the U.S. Capitol switchboard. You want us to call Congress and bully them into what? Reforming the FDA so that we can import shady sunscreen from South Korea, then rub it on our bodies without knowing what the fuck it is? Doesn't the FDA exist to protect us from such?
And sometimes that's BS because a lot of these countries have stricter regulations on cosmetics and medicine than us. You know, so it might actually make sense to import this sunscreen. It's just like, why aren't you making this argument for insulin? Why is it sunscreen? And why are you calling on your followers to fight for sunscreen rather than calling on them to fight for Medicare for all? Or, you know, even expecting us to go fight for sunscreen and take time out of our day to call the U.S. Capitol and fight for better sunscreen when you won't even force the vote on Medicare for all, right? You won't fight for us. Why should we fight for you?
And their approach to regulating sunscreen. Interesting.
Which, yeah, I mean, if I could just say so, like in this context, she is using her platform to essentially engage in a demand and try to mobilize people to engage in a political action, contacting, you know, their congress member, whatever. She did not do her fundamental job here, which is educating the populace on why that this should happen. There was some language in there about, well,
decided to do a Q.
Barriers at the regulatory barriers at the FDA and fund public research so that we can all enjoy the filters that develop out of the scientific process.
Just need to make some noise about it.
Totally. I mean, I love Korean sunscreens, but I want to buy this in the US. Why do we need to import them from all over the place?
Why do you love Korean sunscreens more than American?
I only love sunscreen from the DPRK. The people's sunscreen. That's what I think we should do. Relieve the embargo on the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and only buy sunscreen from them. It'll be like when the Soviet Union bought all of Cuba's sugar to basically just prop up their economy and make sure that Cuba could continue to function. Yeah. Thoughts on people who lived in the USSR and hate socialism? Well, actually, over 70% of Russian citizens say that they prefer the Soviet economic model to their current economic model, to the economic model that followed, where their country was pillaged by neoliberal corporations in the West. But, you know, when it comes to people who have moved out of China or Vietnam or the USSR, any socialist country, Cuba's a great example for Americans, because Cuba's obviously really close to the U.S., so a lot of the people who flee Cuba end up coming here and settling in Miami, Florida, or the U.S. But think about the position that a lot of those people are in. First of all, a lot of the people who flee socialist governments, like in the case of Cuba, were the people who had their land seized. So it was the plantation owners, the slave owners, the people who owned the mines and the predatory industries that were seized by the people. So the richest man in Cuba, Che Guevara, said, you know, you're welcome to stay and join the revolution, but you'll just have to work a regular job like everyone else. You'll no longer be able to own a plantation. That guy the next day was on a flight to Miami. But so for one, if they're part of the bourgeoisie, the revolution seized their means of production. So they're not going to be happy about it, and they're going to bash socialism, and they're going to bash their home country, and they're going to call it authoritarianism. Because what does what does freedom really mean for for the West and for the U.S. empire and for corporations? It means freedom of exploitation, freedom for corporations to do whatever they want. So they're going to call it an infringement on their freedom, the fact that they're no longer allowed to own plantations and giant mines and massively exploit the people of Cuba and their tobacco and sugar fields. Also, there's just the psychological effect that moving from a communist country into an anti-communist country has, right? When you move to the U.S., if you say you're from Cuba or whatever, people are they're all automatically propagandized to be like, oh, how bad was that? Cuba's really poor and their government runs everything, right? They're a dictatorship, right? So that's what we've been beat over the head to believe. So when a lot of these people come, when the diaspora comes to the U.S., they're encouraged to go along with those stories. Oh, yes, my time in Cuba was horrible. One time the government stole my family's cat, or my time in the Soviet Union was horrible. There's social pressure when you move to the U.S., if you're from an existing socialist country, to bash the socialist country that you came from. So that plays into it, too. And a lot of people are just literally paid by the U.S. to do that. Like what the World Uyghur Congress does, they basically pay people who have left the Xinjiang region of China to say that China's doing a genocide and infringing on the rights of Uyghurs because they won't allow terrorist groups to run around and do whatever they want. Western-backed terrorist groups like the ETIM, East Turkestan Islamic Movement, which stemmed out of the Mujahideen that the U.S. was funneling arms and weapons into to fight the Soviet Union and Afghanistan in the 70s and 80s, which would eventually splinter into Al-Qaeda as well as the ETIM and come back to bite the U.S. in the butt by doing 9/11, but not really the ruling class because they just utilized 9/11 to launch their war on terror. So there you go. Hopefully that answers your question. Thank you so much for the super chat, comrade. Much appreciated. Thank you all for the super chats that we've received today. Always highly appreciative of that. Should we talk about what do I want to do here? There's one video about Libya that we could watch. Let's do a fun one. This is from Charlie, aka Penguin Zero, or is it Penguin Z? Penguins Zero. This guy's pretty funny, and a lot of times his commentary is somewhat like class conscious. And he did these videos about YouTube pranksters. I think it's fitting, considering we might have gotten hit by some pranksters when it comes to the Oliver Anthony interview. Some pranksters might have impersonated Oliver Anthony to try and set up an interview, which screwed over all the working class people in our audience who took time out of their day to watch the interview. It's just like, why do these people take time out of their lives to inconvenience other people and inconvenience other people's days? But when it comes to these YouTube pranksters, they're doing it for clout. They're doing it for money, right? They're alienated from the people around them. They're alienated from the rest of society, and they're willing to just, screw over the rest of society, inconvenience the rest of society, make themselves hated by the rest of society in order to get that bag, in order to get those views on YouTube. So it's a great example of how capitalism alienates us from each other and incentivizes kids to push or to prioritize their own profits over their social relations and their relationships with others and, how they're existing within the community. It also shows how pro-felicity is a big thing. And, a lot of kids these days care more about the curation of their online profiles than they care about, how they're viewed in real life or what they're actually doing with their actions or how they're actually affecting the people around them, right? It's all about how can I get the numbers to go up on my profile? And, of course, everybody's affected by this in the modern era. If you're not subscribed to the Midwestern Marx Institute, please, please, please do, like and share the stream. I want to increase the size of our Midwestern Marx profile too. It's just the part of living in the modern world. But, it's interesting, like you have these YouTube pranksters who prioritize their profile above all else. And if you want to learn more about this concept of prophilicity, which is a philosophical concept, it's been fleshed out by Dr. Hans-Georg Müller, who's a German philosopher based in China, who has a YouTube channel called Carefree Wandering. Watch his video called Prophilicity, or all his videos on prophilicity. They're fantastic, very insightful for understanding the modern world in this age of social media and technology.
Only thing more pathetic than an internet prankster is nothing. These degenerate worms whose entire existence revolves around making strangers' lives worse in public so that they can film it and post it online for content are actually the most embarrassing thing humanity has ever produced. And I've mentioned this before, but I actually think making fun of pranksters is an important public service to try and deter other youngsters from growing.
See, that's why I'm doing it. Some people might think this isn't serious content. They might think, Eddie, go back to talking about China and the economic development of China and socialism and deteriorating economic conditions in the U.S. and the Cornell West campaign. But we already did that today, right? We already talked about all that serious stuff. So now it's time to perform the important public service of making fun of YouTube pranksters. You're welcome, humanity.
Growing up to be this kind of failure of a person. So I just learned about a new prankster who's been at the game for over a year, and the only thing he has to show for it is a few arrests and a community of children that just shoot spitballs and make fun of him like a bad birthday party clown. So I'm not going to tell you his name. His name's not important. Don't go out of your way to find and harass him. Don't give him any kind of engagement off of it. I just think he is another great example of the brain rot that's really infested the youth these days here.
Well, hop up this counter and break that camera, you gonna be mad. So stop fucking recording me, though.
Make my milkshake and chill out.
I'm not making nothing.
You're not making nothing? Dude, you heard how she talked to me?
I swear that I'm not making nothing. Get out of here.
Hey!
Dude, look how they treat these service employees. These people who are just working for like $9 an hour to pay their rent or to buy food or whatever. And this pudgy kid just comes up to him, starts filming him. Won't stop filming them, and make me my milkshake. Make me my milkshake and shut up. And it turns out that one of these people behind the counter was actually an MMA fighter. Spoiler alert. So this guy should have chilled out. He could have gotten a butt whooping.
Inside? I'm not making nothing. You want to stand here? Stand here. We're not separating here.
I'll go back there myself and make a damn milkshake, motherfucker.
I swear to God, shit out of here.
Dude, get the hell out of here.
Get the fuck out of here, I said.
Dude,
make me, Mr. Sir! Make me!
We gotta go. Let's go. Let's get the fuck out of here.
Yes, the classic prank. Harass customer service employees and...
Yeah, what kind of prank even was that? Like, there was no joke there. There was no, like, tricking someone into thinking one thing and then be like, aha, it wasn't true. You know, there was no punchline in there. It was just them being mean to people who are making burgers for like $9 an hour. Like, clearly you guys have never worked a job like that, or you wouldn't be there doing that. You would realize that these people are probably pissed off. They're probably overworked. They probably either have been there all day or they know they got to be there all day, not getting paid crap. And you're going to go make their day worse. That's your contribution to humanity.
Be an insufferable asshole. So this is how I found his content, and it turns out this is all he does. His entire existence is like this perpetual miasma of misery that haunts his community, where he and the after-school cringe club latch onto his ass to suckle a bit of clout out of it, get together, and just make complete strangers' days worse. And then he films it and proudly posts it online. And I do mean proud. This is his pride and joy. Every time he gets arrested, he wears it like a Boy Scout badge of honor. I legitimately couldn't imagine being his parents. The shame would be overwhelming. I would rather my child grow up to be a professional toilet seat kisser than grow up to be a prankster like this kid.
Yeah, I'll go back there myself and make a damn milkshake, motherfucker.
He sounds so nervous. And then he immediately turns his back. Like, no, you won't, bro. No, you will not.
A completely flat and hollow threat from this affluent douchebag who I have no doubt has never faced any real repercussions from his actions. And he has the world's worst laugh. His laugh sounds like Ed from Ed, Edd n Eddy. Just some real goofy shit. It's fucking ridiculous. He is like actually biologically engineered through evolution to be the perfect cringe loser. Now, you may have noticed a lot of cuts in this, and that's what they leave out of context that list here to get to this point. But the manager has spoke up about this situation afterwards. And I almost can't help but appreciate the delusion from the prankster and his friends to think that somehow they look tough here or look cool. Because in this situation, the manager is the biggest W by far. The manager stood his ground, handled everything really well, I thought, and wasn't afraid to really fall into threats or anything stupid like that. they would have 100% ended up on the fuck around and find out matrix, because it turns out the manager is an actual trained fighter. So there's no doubt in my mind he would have beat all their asses, steamed their ham thoroughly. In that video, he does also go over how
people keep saying, man, civil society is dying. U.S. culture is dying. Yeah, this is the superstructure that's created by capitalist society in the era of technology and in the era of social media and the era of what Carlos and I would call pro-felicity because of Hans Georg Muller, that German philosopher I just mentioned. Right? They're materially incentivized to do this. They're making money from this. Their profile is increasing in subscribers and views by doing this, by being mean to these service workers. Right? This is the kind of culture that the attention economy props up. This is the kind of culture and relations between human beings that the capitalistic attention economy creates.
How rude they were being and how everything kept escalating because of them, which of course was cut out from his post about it. Now you're probably wondering how old the doofus committee here is from the pranksters, because the main guy has the face of a 13-year-old boy. But would you believe me if I told you that he's actually 19 years old? There's a video as well as an article going over one of his mini runs-in with authorities, and he says, "How are you my height? I'm 19. I mean, I almost feel bad for him being 19 years old and being stuck with the face of like a 12-year-old Xbox Live Call of Duty gamer. That's rough. Like, there's no doubt he probably feels insecure about that, and that might be why he's lashing out so much against his community around him and turned to the dark side, going down the prankster path, the public nuisance asshole road."
You guys walk up on people that you guys know don't like you, that have chased you around before. Someone's eventually going to probably beat you guys up.
That's what we're aiming for.
Why?
Low key, just to get some content out of it.
Okay, so you're going to be the victim of an assault for a content?
A super honest...
Oh, man. They've just totally embraced it. Look how smug he is here. He thought that was hilarious. He thought that was so funny. He doesn't realize what he just said represents like the collapse of society. Where he's like, yeah, I'll literally kill someone as long as I can get some content out of it. As long as my YouTube prank channel keeps blowing up. I'll do anything for the views, you know what I'm saying? Like, good Lord. China is laughing at us right now. Charlie check, why are we watching Critical? Just to watch the decay of capitalist culture and capitalist society.
Okay, so you're going to be the victim of an assault for a content?
A super honest answer from a super big douchebag. They keep pushing people, harassing them until they snap, hoping that they'll either attack them or have some kind of big blow up that they can film and post online for content. Heavens to Betsy. What a turbo loser. Yikes. He's giggling and smiling while giving this answer to the officer. He is so delusional. He really thinks that this is his ticket to internet updos, that precious clout and attention online, when in reality, it's most likely just going to be his ticket to the hospital or jail.
What? What?
You guys all walk away.
We didn't even do nothing. Wow, bro. Yep.
Also, I feel like anytime American police come up, we got to mention the racist and classist nature of American police. They're far more likely to commit violent crimes against you if you're black, and even more likely to if you're poor. That's the number one distinction for who's more likely to get targeted by police violence. But these affluent white kids don't have to be that nervous around the police, or at least as nervous.
Yep. Every time this asshole gets arrested, it's like the happiest moment of his life. It's like Christmas morning every single time he finds himself in a pair of handcuffs, because he's so delusional that he believes that that's going to help the content blow up or help him go viral. And it hasn't. It doesn't. And hopefully it never will. So he just keeps doing these extremely stupid stunts, calling them pranks, harassing just normal people in the world, eventually gets the cops called on him, and then him and his friends are like, oh, I can't believe it. What?
What do you mean? Yo, who the hell is that? Yo, get that camera off me. Get the hell out of here. Huh? Get the hell on out of here.
Good one. This guy just loves treating workers as props for his videos. I still can't believe he's actually 19 years old.
It's like elderly Home Depot workers, bro. Like, these people literally don't have empathy. Like, the part of your brain that's supposed to make you a normal human being and treat other people normally and with respect. The part of your brain that would make you feel ashamed for acting like such a fool. It's just been ripped out and replaced with, just clout sharking. Where's the clout? Where's the clout? I'll mistreat however many working class old people I need to for the clout.
He looks like he still needs mommy and daddy to drive him to this Home Depot so he can film these pranks with his buddies. I will probably never understand who actually watches something like that and finds any enjoyment out of it. Even if I was 12 years old, I don't see myself even smiling at it. It's just annoying. As a viewer, and I feel real bad for anyone that is unfortunate enough to be subjected to one of his pranks. Like, I really don't think I'll ever understand why kids grow up wanting to do this, or why kids somehow even get moderately entertained by that.
Sure. I don't know why they get entertained. I mean, they put clickbait titles, and it's like the shocking stuff, and it's just, I don't know. You get young kids who don't really get it and don't really know what it's like to work a 9-to-5 job at Home Depot or at a service, do service work all day. They don't get how this kid is being a jerk, maybe, but I mean, there's so many people who've gotten rich and famous from YouTube pranks. I totally understand why kids want to do it. They want to make money.
Jersey.
Don't get Jersey right now. We're just seeing it.
Yeah, I was thinking he smelled like shit.
What you say, my dog?
I said I thought your dog smelled like shit.
Really?
Yeah.
Get the fuck out of here. Why does it smell like shit?
Wait, it's a dog, sir.
Get out of here. Get out of here.
Calm down.
Right? Don't say my dog is this or that. Get the fuck out.
I was just saying the dog smelled like shit, sir.
Good one. Again. Man, Junior, you're really on a hot streak with these bangers. Your dog smells like shit prank. People can't even just relax on a bench outside with their pet without you going out of your way.
It's like elderly people, too. Like, not to be like an old man, but like, do you have no respect? Like, it's just so disrespectful.
To bother them. Nothing is safe from your cringe apocalypse that you bring with you everywhere you go. Everything this guy and his friends have ever done that I can find is just actual trash. It's just bothering people in the world and calling it a prank. It sucks. It's just public nuisance degeneracy. And I'll always take a little bit of time to make fun of some pieces of shit like this because I think it is an invaluable service to provide. Nobody should end up like this guy or his team here. And they're not really a team. This guy I already know is insufferable to be around. The only reason his friends orbit him is because he has the tiniest bit of clout online, and they try and suckle a little bit out of that from his bosom for themselves. That's the only reason they stomach him for however brief a time when they're filming these awful videos together. They're not real friends. It's just a bunch of fake people surrounding themselves with each other and convincing each other that making these pranks is somehow going to get them to the top. It's just fucking...
Yeah, imagine if they lived in, like, Dagestan in Russia. A place where, like, the cops don't immediately jump on you and arrest you for fighting in the streets, which, is... They do that in the U.S., but that's not what they do everywhere. Khabib Nurmagomedov, who's from the Dagestan region or the Caucasus Mountains in Russia, said that, like, in America, you get arrested if you fight in the street. It's kind of just a thing where I grew up. Right? But that also builds character. This is why I encourage so many people to join wrestling or get involved with combat sports, because it helps you build character. It helps you realize that there's always somebody tougher, right? And that you should have respect for people, especially the people or people who can whoop you up. But in America, there's none of that. And, that old man couldn't just like get up and jack the kid. Not that he should, not that child abuse should be legal, but in that case, when it comes to that kid, what do the 5 fingers say to the face? That's what he needs in a video game. Somebody said that looked like bum fight. Have people ever seen the bum fights episode where he shows up on Dr. Phil dressed as Dr. Phil? And then Dr. Phil's like, you're exploiting these homeless people and using them to make money. And the bum fights guy is like, that's what you do to people on your show. You exploit their trauma to make money. And Dr. Phil kicks him off. Hold on. We got to watch this.
A service to the homeless people. I'm turning these people into something special.
And don't get me wrong. The bum fights guy is a piece of crap. Dr. Phil's absolutely right that he's exploiting homeless people and making them fight to make money. But it's also kind of the same thing that Dr. Phil does.
motivating them, inspiring them. I believe our customers are infatuated with watching our videos because there's a lot of people that are addicted to violence. They want to see homeless people doing crazy things. It's something that this world needs. For example, one guy, he was a crackhead and his teeth were bothering him, so we got him a pair of pliers and we ripped one of his teeth out. And he just wanted a bottle of JD. There are lines that I don't cross. I don't do hardcore porn, and I don't deal with death footage. We don't just sit there and give...
This is an example of the decay of capitalist culture as well, especially in the era of the internet. Bum fights, the fact that there even are homeless people and that there are people who will walk up to them with a camera and make them fight for money. Capitalist culture.
Give them our pocket change and say good luck.
You think this happens in China? You think there's bum fights in China? No, there's not even homeless people in China.
We put him to work. There was a homeless guy. We said, what would you do if we gave you some money? He said, I'd eat a raw frog. So we went to the Asian market, got a raw frog, and he ate it on the sidewalk. We paid him $20. I've made multi-millions off the Bum Fights video series. I'm not surprised at my success. It's a sick world.
Stop the tape. Stop the tape. I don't want to talk to you.
Why not?
That's despicable. I don't want to talk to you. You can go.
If you think I exploit people, every time you bring a guest on this show, you exploit them and spread whatever problems they have to the whole world. You think that's helping them?
Yeah, keep telling yourself that. You can go.
So Dr. Phil pretends he's kicking this guy off because he's despicable when he's had some of the worst people imaginable on his show. He has people who commit heinous crimes. He's actually just mad that this guy came dressed as Dr. Phil and said Dr. Phil's doing the same thing he is. Which it is. It's the commodification of trauma. That's what Dr. Phil's show is. It's people's trauma and people's issues commodified. They're selling them.
You know what? Who do you think you are, huh?
Bye. Come on.
Huh?
Come on.
No, I'm not finished talking to you.
Yeah, you are.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, you are.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, you are. Come on, let's go. Sorry, but I just watched that footage, and that is absolutely despicable, and I refuse to publicize that. I'm just not gonna...
You already did publicize it, Dr. Phil. You're going to air this segment. Dude, he's so dumb. I just thought that was hilarious. Messing with working class people. New suburban TV, I guess. I guess some people are entertained by it. I'm glad you guys aren't. He's such a dork. He is. I'm seeing this footage for the first time, folks. Yeah, right, Dr. Phil. Scripted it. Yeah, it definitely could have been scripted. Like, has anyone ever watched Pawn Stars or any of those so-called reality TV shows where there's a character like Chumley who's just like insanely dumb and like comedic relief every episode? It's like, this is obviously scripted. But I don't think this is the whole youth, just a small portion. True. Very true. Thanks, Popers. That's very true. Later, Oprah had him murdered. They're clapping like he's some hero. Yeah, they do that on all those live studio audience shows. It was scripted. I don't know when or where I read it, but someone on the show confirmed it. Yeah, that's too bad. I mean, not surprising. I'm sure like most of those shows are scripted. Two weirdos and trauma merchants attacking each other. You got so triggered by the guy cosplaying. Absolutely. Let's see. Yeah, it does kind of look like it was staged from what I'm seeing here from my short-term research. Such disgusting forms of media. Absolutely. That's what, honestly, like the 70% of people who say that they miss the Soviet Union and the Soviet economic model, the 70% of Russians, they don't they do miss, healthcare and daycare and education and all that. But more so than that, they say that they miss the culture that was created, the more collective culture, and the kind of art and culture and stuff like that was promoted by the government and by the party. That's what they miss versus, under neoliberalism and, individualism, we get culture like bum fights, right? Like the Soviet Union has Pizza Hut now, but they no longer have theater programs and things like that for working class people. They're no longer, the party's no longer making sure that people aren't working all day and ensuring that they have time for art and culture. It's just the commodification of everything instead. So yeah, well, the Eddie Liger Power Hour made it 2 hours and 20 minutes today. That's definitely longer than an hour. So I'm going to wrap it up there. Be sure to follow us at Patreon, help us out at patreon.com/MidwesternMarks if you want to support the show or become a YouTube member. You get all sorts of perks with that. Thank you all so much. Thank you to our moderators, Cobra Commander, Ware Pilgrim, and Ill State Fishing. I know Cobra was here most of the day. Oh, he's still here. What's up, Cobra? Thank you so much to them. They perform the service of moderating for free. So really appreciate them for that. Shout out to all the super chatters, all the Patreon supporters, all the Twitch subscribers, and all that. What was I going to say? Oh, today I got a big day. Recently I took over a private wrestling club. So I'm no longer attached to the university. So weirdos from the internet can no longer email the university and demand that they fire me because I'm a communist. It's now a private club where I can work with kids, and we got our grand opening today. So I'm pumped and nervous and excited about that meeting, but it should be great. We'll keep y'all tuned, keep y'all up to date on the Oliver Anthony interview. Hopefully it wasn't a prank. But yeah, I think Noah and Carlos might be on doing something later today. If not, maybe I'll do a stream with Carlos. I was supposed to last night, but it got too late. I had to be up early this morning, and I didn't want to stay up super late. So that's all I got. Thank you all for hanging out. Much appreciated. We'll see you next time.
Cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.